Are there any like hot takes that you have personally as a developer that you would like to see introduced into the main game? Maybe leagues ideas or maybe just unpopular things that you actually think would be beneficial for the game's health?
It's definitely too late now, and I'm not proposing this would ever happen, or I'm advocating for it at all. But I think pets as a concept should have either been 5 times more common or 20 times rarer. And like my thought process for that is that I think right now most pets are in this awkward little spot where they are incredibly rare, but they're still achievable for an individual. They're still in that realms of like, yeah, I could grind for that. It's going to take me 30, 40, 100 hours, but that's a reasonable thing for RuneScape somehow. But if they were 20 times rarer, I think you're putting them in like the 200 mil category of like, yeah, most people are just never going to bother going for that, right? But you still get the prestige of it when someone gets it. Oh my god, that's insane! That's so cool. And you might just randomly get one. It still has that entire effect, right? Maybe you only get one or two of them throughout your entire account, and like you still get that excitement. But then it's not that like everyone just can go like, yeah, I got the pet from like these 14 bosses, and like they're just grinding through them all.
Hmm.
It's not that I inherently think that grinding for pets is like a bad thing. I think it's just that I think players doing the same content for a very, very long time is a big reason why a lot of complaints come out. And it's not that we shouldn't fix those complaints, right? Like if people find issues in our game, we should definitely fix them. But it's hard not to find issues with content when you've done it for 300 hours. Like
Yeah.
there is going to be something that annoys you, right? Like no matter how small it is, there's going to be some small gripe that comes out when you've done something that much in your life. And that's kind of why I'm thinking like I think they could have either been more common to the point where they don't force you to do them so much. They could still be the rarest thing on the drop table, right?
Hmm.
But there's a big gap between Black Tourmaline Core and Grotesque Guardian's Pet, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a big gap there that we could have brought them down significantly. But yeah, they could have still felt rare and like an exciting thing to get randomly.
That
Yeah,
actually is a really interesting take because, well, and again, like you said, you're probably not on board with it nowadays. We just have a completely different feeling, like culture, I guess, across the game with the release of Collection Log. It feels like people kind of feel entitled to be able to complete certain things, and then when they green log
yeah.
it, they want it to stay green logged. They worked
Mm.
for it, so don't touch it now. But man, if I'm thinking like pre-collection log, if it really had been, 10x or 20x rarer, then getting a pet would be seen as getting third age. And
It
you
would be.
really are going to value having that pet follow you around. Because it's
You're
like,
gonna feel so cool, right? That's the
oh, yeah.
benefits of making things really rare is that it makes them more desirable, right? The benefits of a hardcore Iron Man getting Grandmaster combat achievements, right? Getting the Zook Helm,
Hmm.
like that's so much cooler than a regular account because you know what that entails.
Yep.
Like it's so much more prestigious. And that's kind of where I'm like, if you wanted them to be like really prestigious, rare things that earlier no one had, I think they should have gone a lot rarer. If you wanted them to just be a cool cosmetic that most people can get if you tried hard enough, then I think they could have been more common.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone's subjectivity about like what's rare and too common and too hard is all up in the air. But that's just my point of view. That I think they're in a weird middle ground right now, especially for some pets, right?
Hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm definitely a huge proponent of keeping useful drops at a very reasonable drop rate. I think I've just continually, as the years go on, see players just suffering at pieces of content because they feel. And again, like I talked to Husky about this. He agrees, but he also disagrees. He just thinks, when there's some grinds in particular, I'm thinking of CG or I'm thinking of Chambers, people in their minds, especially Iron Man, think that like this is the meta that has been, you know, carved out for me, and I need to go get this Bofa before I can do anything else. And so then
Yeah,
they
just
lock
too
themselves.
efficient or whatever.
Yeah. But ultimately in my head, I'm thinking, okay, maybe a twisted bow doesn't need to be, like 500, 600 hours for a casual player. Now, of course, it's
Yeah.
way more common than that if you have max gear already and you're just grinding chambers out super, super efficiently. But for the average person that's doing 3-man or 4-man chambers and waiting around at the bank and, just kind of going in here and there, not even getting that many points, getting a T-bow is, I feel like it's almost like ignorance really is bliss. You don't want to know how many hours you're going to have to sit here potentially.
Yeah.
So there's places like that. But when it comes to cosmetics, and I actually kind of agreed with Mod Rock on this, the whole Jar of Darkness thing. Yeah, maybe it shouldn't have been released as a 1 in 2,500 drop on release, but ultimately it has no use. It's like the equivalent of Third Age, but the collection log community and again, everybody has a different take on this. My take was that this is seen as Third Age at this point. So nobody's going to complete the collection log. I mean, maybe in like 40 years somebody will, but it's just that's not something that people should be going for anyway to complete it. And I thought the Jar of Darkness buff was just seen as, I don't know, catering to the people that just want their clogs, which they're not even useful items. Like I would see it like if the Bofa was to be slightly increased or Vatiba was to be slightly increased, but a very useless item that's purely flex, I just didn't see a need for that. Same with Stale Baguette. Same with Evil Chicken, just all of a sudden becoming completely devalued. I just feel like these are all flex items that can stay super rare.
Yeah, I think a lot of where the community comes from on this is almost just like a matter of consistency, right? Like Jar of Darkness was the outlier jar, right?
Yeah.
It was so much rarer than every other jar, and that's where I think players like they see the outlier and they kind of want to rein it in. They want to smooth out the edges and bring it all in and make it feel what's right, regardless of the collection log community, even though they have their own motives for it, sure. But I think that's more so what people see is that they kind of want to almost like fix the issues in the game, and that in their eyes looks like an issue.
Hmm.
That's obviously one perspective of seeing those outliers compared to the jars and maybe other similar items. I'm sure, like, if one gilded item was 20 times rarer than the other gilded items, and maybe we'd have the same discussion, right? Like, oh, why is this gilded item just arbitrarily rarer than all the other gilded items? Maybe we should bring that in. Like, even though in reality it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't change anything. They're all just arbitrary drop rates. They're all just almost made up, like, crazy rare cosmetics that don't mean anything. But I think there's almost just this desire to, yeah, fix things in the game, even though it affects virtually nothing. Um, I don't think that's like a bad thing, right? I think people see those things and they think they're trying to help the game, and maybe in some perspectives they are. Just everyone's doing what they think is correct. Again, sometimes they've got their own motives, sometimes they don't. But sometimes things don't need to be consistent, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's no benefit to consistency. Like you're doing it for the sake of it. Sometimes there is benefit. It's all case by case. I'm not really sure how I feel about the Jar of Darkness. I don't particularly care. It's just a jar. It's
Yeah.
more rarer, common. Like same logic that you just said that it's useless. Like by the same logic, sure, then it might as well just be more common than
Yeah.
it's just a cosmetic. It's just. I think it would be a shame if the game had nothing that felt ridiculously rare. I think there's just something in me as a gamer where it's like it's cool that some things are just unobtainable and just stupidly rare. Like there's just
Yeah.
something in me that it's just interesting, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually matter for the sake of gameplay.
Yeah. No, and I actually agree. I think that's the healthier mindset to see it as let's standardize things. Let's make the game not feel very, very jank on some random item rarities. I think part of the reason I get a little bit upset, it's almost like secondhand upsetness where I know a player, like for example, when Evil Chicken was like incredibly rare, I remember some Reddit posts of like the first Iron Man to get a full Evil Chicken outfit. And it was just seen as wow, like you got so
Yeah.
lucky. And that's it. That's an incredible achievement. Like well done. And then all of a sudden Forestry comes out and now you can grind Evil Chicken in a week if you just sweat it. That was
I
a
do wonder,
yeah.
like, where people sit on that because I just like that. I think I can almost speak for the entire Jagex team in this regard because it's almost like old school philosophy, right? We want to preserve old grinds. We don't really want to diminish achievements. We don't want people to feel bad that something they've done was almost a waste of time. And that is, to a certain extent, inevitable with a live service game, right? We're going to update things. Some things are going to get easier, but hopefully not by crazy margins, right? We don't really want to make something 10x faster overnight. Some things might progressively get quicker over time. I think genuinely we don't want to just release an update and just devalue someone's experience entirely.
Hmm.
Um, and like, I think if we just said like tomorrow that we're going to remove 30 of the hardest Grandmaster tasks from Grandmaster combat achievements, like, and it's just going to be significantly easier, right? I think a lot of people, I'd like to think, that a lot of people would see that as a negative change, right? It's like, oh, now all these people that got grinded for it, um, a lot of their time was wasted. They didn't need to spend hours and hours grinding these miserable tasks like perfect TOB or whatever. Like, that's a shame, and we don't really like that. But then, yeah, like with things like Evil Chicken, it feels like people just don't really care about that as much. Like they don't really see the prestige in that, and maybe there's validity in that because it's just this like a really weird arbitrary thing as opposed to like a core system of the game like combat achievements.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the reason why people don't care about those things being devalued as much. Maybe people just simply didn't understand like how much it got devalued by. Like unless you're really in the know, maybe you actually just had no idea the magnitude of like, how fast that got. And maybe if we communicated that better, people might push back on it if they could understand that. Maybe it's just a thing that kind of just happened, right? Versus more of a conscious choice.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it does seem sometimes a little arbitrary that people are fine with some things getting devalued, but not other things.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly why.
Ultimately, it really is just, it's all arbitrary. And there's so much to keep track of too. Like I can't even imagine being a developer coming out with a new update that is slightly game changing. I mean, for example, Dragonstone armor, again, just completely useless armor. That's a flex for Iron Man. It's a collection log for mains that want to spend a bunch of money on the enhanced crystal keys. And if you were to just randomly come out with a new boss that just poops out loops and teeth halves,
Yeah.
you've now completely devalued this fun sort of, on the same level of Evil Chicken grind where Iron Men really see getting full Dragonstone as a huge accomplishment. And a JMod could easily just put into the drop table, oh, we're going to drop like 10 teeth half noted from this boss. There's no problem in that, right? And then all of a sudden there is. And it's the same thing with, you know, even the memes of, Swampletics. If you add an anvil into like Mauritania, you're trolling the place because of one creator. Or like now, if you add, I don't know, there's like a bunch of different examples I could bring up, but it's just funny how like you have to be so careful as a dev to not devalue certain grinds that people find valuable. So I can't even imagine the balancing and the everything that goes along with adding new drop tables and things like that to places. I mean, even the archaeologist on Fossil Island, when it dropped a glory, I think like people were so upset by that because you devalued this nostalgic grind that Iron Men have to go, grind 80 Hunter to boost for a glory from a Dragon Imp. So,
Thankfully, we're a live service game, and I'd like to think we're pretty responsive and communicative, right? And we listen to people.
mhm.
So when we do make issues like that, we can rectify them, we can fix them.
Yeah.
So we very rarely cause permanent damage with any of these things. We do make mistakes, 100%. We miss things. We might have forgot that this random arbitrary thing devalued this random arbitrary account. But if we think it's a big enough deal and people are upset with it, then we'll reverse it. And
Yeah.
that's great.
I think it's really cool. It gives me a little bit of hope as well, seeing how late something can be updated and still be a very good benefit for the game, like the blowpipe getting nerfed years down the line, and that felt like you
Mhm.
cannot do this now. I mean, because we're living in the present, at that point where you don't even see the future of how many dividends this will pay if we just update it now. But now we see it as like a very positive change that the blowpipe got nerfed. Because if it had never got nerfed, if you guys never took that, like ripped that band-aid off, we'd still be trying to somehow balance Monster's defense to these just uttermost extremes just to make it so the blowpipe isn't just dominant
Yeah.
everywhere.
It gave us so much flexibility. And, like, I mean, you can see how many different range weapons we've introduced to the game since that
Yep.
wouldn't really have been possible without nerfing that, changing that landscape somewhat.